Tonight, the first of Tasmania's new spirits bound for Scotland, set to berth there indefinitely. Hello, I'm Guy Stainer. This is ABC News. Also tonight, a crucial decision on the Maugean skate delayed, sparking fury from both sides of the salmon debate. Australia's COVID response found to be lacking in preparedness and communication. And a cloud over aid in Gaza, with a key support agency effectively banned by Israel. The freshly acquired Spirit of Tasmania 4 will swap Finland for Scotland next month. It's set to anchor there until TT Line works out what to do with the vessel that can't start its Bass Strait service for at least 2 years. State political reporter Adam Langenberg joins us now. Adam, what is the latest?
Guy, we knew the first new Spirit of Tasmania ship needed to leave Finland by the end of November when icy conditions set in, and that the two new ships can't start operating in Tasmania until early 2027 when a new berth is built. But what we didn't know was what would happen in the short term. The government wants to lease out the new ships. TT Line prefers to store them in Scotland. Well, we found out this afternoon that in the short term at least, they're headed to Leith in Scotland. Spirit of Tasmania 4 is headed to Leith in Scotland, where it will remain for an indefinite amount of time. Ferry operator TT Line says it remains very much committed to leasing out or chartering the new ships, and the fit out of Spirit of Tasmania 4 is almost complete. Now, Guy, Spirit of Tasmania 5, that's still under construction and it remains in Finland. It's yet to have its engine commissioned or undergo a sea trial, meaning there's no water, oil or gas in its internal systems, and it's therefore unlikely to suffer any damage as a result of that freezing Finland weather.
Adam Langenberg, thanks for that update. The Federal Environment Minister has sparked fury by delaying a decision on the status of the Maugean skate. It means a separate decision on the future of salmon farming in Macquarie Harbour, the skate's only habitat, is also likely to be delayed. Environmentalists say the endangered species needs urgent protection, while the salmon industry says workers are now stuck in limbo for another year.
The Maugean skate is only found in Macquarie Harbour on Tasmania's west coast, a place that's also home to a salmon farming industry that's been linked to the degradation of its habitat.
This animal, the Maugean skate, that's been on the planet for millions of years, has gone from a healthy population to rapidly plummeting in such a short period of time.
A decision on whether to upgrade the skate's status from endangered to critically endangered was expected this week, but the Federal Environment Minister has now delayed it by a year.
Tanya Plibersek is potentially signing the death warrant for this species, this magnificent species.
We're frustrated, but we're not surprised by today's development. We know that the science that the Conservation Committee were looking at was highly questionable.
The government says the Threatened Species Scientific Committee needs more time to assess complex new research, which indicates the skate's population has started to stabilise and the harbour's health is on the improve.
To make a decision based on half the facts is a wrong decision, and we need to make sure that the decision that is made with the full science and all the facts on the table.
The delay in determining the species status comes as Tanya Plibersek continues a separate and highly contentious assessment on whether salmon farming in Macquarie Harbour can continue in its current form without risking the fate of the Maugean skate.
Today's decision by the Labor government in Canberra is nothing short of cowardice. The fact that we are now seeing a minister basically kick down the road a can to beyond the next election.
We've been going now for over 12 months without a decision. It's now another Christmas period that them families with the industry have to go through, not knowing what their future holds.
A future that might not be decided until October next year. Jono Gibson, ABC News.
Federal Lions MP Brian Mitchell says he expects former Tasmanian Labor leader Rebecca White to run for his seat in next year's federal election and will happily stand aside for her. Speculation is mounting federal Labor power brokers want Ms White and not Mr Mitchell to contest the seat. Ms White is yet to comment. She led the state Labor Party to 3 straight election defeats but received the most votes in Lions at each of those polls. Mr Mitchell was first elected in 2016 and now holds the marginal seat by 0.9%. He says while he intends to seek party pre-selection and run for a 4th term, he supports Ms White replacing him.
The margin is quite slim, unlike me, unfortunately. And if I think Rebecca White has the best chance of ensuring that happens, and I do, then I'm very happy to see Rebecca take her place in the Federal Labor Party.
An independent inquiry has found Australia's COVID-19 response eroded public trust so deeply people might not accept public restrictions like lockdowns in the future. The report hailed courageous decisions by leaders at the start of the pandemic, but said cracks started to emerge as the crisis wore on. Stephanie Dalzell has the story.
Silent cities, shops shuttered, and hospitals overwhelmed. Generations changed by a once-in-a-century pandemic.
The striking conclusion, I think, from this report, though, is that right now we are arguably worse placed as a country to deal with a pandemic than we were in early 2020.
The report finding Australia's response to the pandemic drove a large decline in public trust.
Many of the measures taken during COVID-19 are unlikely to be accepted by the population again.
Delays in the vaccine rollout, prolonged restrictive public health measures and ultimately cost $31 billion. And the report said some of those measures, like school closures and lockdowns, must be used carefully.
Because of the strength of the public health response, a lot of people felt, they didn't trust what government was doing.
Heavy-handed restrictions also amounted to a lack of compassion, according to the inquiry. That's something acutely felt by Richard Smith, whose wife was in an aged care home. His family was unable to see her for months.
The distress was not only felt by the residents but by the family to see the distress that their loved ones were going through.
But despite all the issues, the report stressed Australia fared well compared to other nations.
We saved lives and we saved livelihoods, and I think Australians should be proud.
One of the recommendations has already been acted on, funding a Centre for Disease Control.
An opportunity to lay a foundation for Australia's future pandemic preparedness.
The toughest decisions on lockdowns, school and border closures and vaccine mandates were made by the states and territories and weren't directly covered by this inquiry. But even so, it was highly critical of poorly justified and disproportionate approaches to restrictions across the country. With goodwill deeply eroded, the report plants serious doubt about whether a less trusting public would even follow better targeted rules in the case of another pandemic. Stephanie Dalzell, ABC News, Canberra.
The Prime Minister has tried to rebuff suggestions he sought flight upgrades directly from Qantas CEO Alan Joyce. But having failed to clearly answer questions about his dealings with the airline boss and attacking others, he remains under scrutiny from the opposition. Here's National Affairs Editor Melissa Clark.
More questions, but not much clarity.
Did you call Alan Joyce personally for these upgrades?
Look, the idea Qantas have a number in terms of bookings that are made private bookings.
When he was Transport Minister and later Opposition Leader, Anthony Albanese received flight upgrades for personal travel to Rome, LA and London. A book by a former Nine newspaper reporter says he liaised directly with CEO Alan Joyce about it. But when pressed, the Prime Minister could only recall discussions about other flights.
I recall direct discussions with Alan Joyce over the flights, the Emirates or Qantas flight to Dubai.
And he went on many other tangents. He attacked the author of the book.
I don't see declarations that he's a former Liberal Party staffer.
He pointed to other MPs declaring flight upgrades.
Paul Fletcher's been upgraded at least 69 times.
He compared his declarations to those of the opposition leader.
I don't have a family trust. I don't have any shares.
And compared their travel arrangements.
I didn't have to declare any flights on private jets owned by billionaires like Gina Rinehart because I haven't engaged in it. As simple as that.
Except last year he did accept a private helicopter flight from trucking magnate Lindsay Fox. For all the retorts, exactly how Anthony Albanese secured those upgrades still isn't entirely clear.
He can throw mud, he can blame other people, but this is a problem of his own making.
And the opposition leader is questioning whether any of this influenced the government's decision last year to block Qatar from offering more international flights.
I think the Prime Minister should take the initiative to refer this matter to the Integrity Commission.
A spokesperson for the Prime Minister calls that suggestion a pathetic attempt at creating a headline. Melissa Clark, ABC News, Canberra.
A child has died and 4 others have been severely injured after a car ploughed into a primary school in Melbourne. Police say the vehicle veered off the road and crashed through a fence at the school in Melbourne's east just after 2:30 this afternoon. 3 girls and 2 boys aged 10 and 11 were rushed to hospital where an 11-year-old boy later died. The driver of the car was a 40-year-old woman who was picking up her child. She's been arrested.
The 40-year-old female is in custody. She's been interviewed by detectives as we speak. It's a tragic circumstance. It's really tough for everybody involved, from the community, the school community, the locals, the first responders, Ambos, police. It's really tough.
Israel's parliament has all but banned the main UN relief agency in Gaza from delivering life-saving aid into the region. The chief of the United Nations says the move could have devastating consequences for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians facing starvation.
Generations of Palestinians have called this place home. 16,000 live in the Shafat refugee camp in East Jerusalem. A community built and supported by UNRWA for decades. It was already challenging for their staff, who provide services including healthcare and education, to come and work here every day. Israel's parliament now making it impossible, banning it operating in Israeli territory.
Anyone who acts like a terrorist has no right to exist in the state of Israel. UNRWA is not an aid agency for refugees, it is an aid agency for Hamas.
In January, Australia joined other nations in pausing funding to UNRWA after Israel claimed the agency had employees involved in the October 7 terrorist attacks. 9 staff were fired, but a UN investigation was unable to independently verify the intelligence used by Israel to make the allegations. Australian funding resumed in March, this ban opposed by the government. The Foreign Minister posting on social media, UNRWA does life-saving work. UNRWA is the biggest provider of aid in Gaza, support which has already been reduced to a trickle. The UN's top humanitarian official has warned that the entire population in the north is now at risk of dying. Israel's ban could make it impossible for UNRWA to operate there.
You won't be able to move in Gaza without being subject to possible attack. There'll be no visas for international staff, no work permits. Supply chains will fall apart.
You guarantee more children being killed. And I'm sorry for the lack of diplomacy in my language, but I think we've moved past the idea of sugarcoating this. We will simply see more little girls and boys in Gaza unnecessarily killed.
The legislation approved by the Knesset comes into force in 90 days, a time frame which has been designed to give Israel an opportunity to make new aid arrangements for the Palestinian population. Israel's parliament backing this proposal before that crucial detail had been sorted out.
UNRWA simply must be replaced. They must be replaced with other organisations that are not infected with terrorism.
There's nobody that can replace them right now in the middle of the crisis.
Added pressure from its strongest ally, Washington today reminding Israel of an earlier threat to cut US military aid if conditions in Gaza aren't addressed.
Passage of this legislation could have implications under US law and US policy. That remains the case.
Tough talk that's done little to sway an emboldened Israel.
And a short time ago, Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran filed this update from outside UNRWA's headquarters in Jerusalem.
Well, this legislation makes it illegal for Israeli officials to deal with UNRWA staff. The agency may try to get aid into a place like Gaza, but the IDF controls all of the entry and exit points into that territory, meaning getting the permissions and the permits required simply will not happen. And while Israel insists someone else will be able to fill the void, we do need to point out that UNRWA has been operating in this space for decades. It was set up in 1949, and replacing the huge amount of infrastructure it has and the large number of people it has will be very difficult, if not impossible, certainly within the time frame Israel has set itself. We do also need to note that this decision by the Knesset puts Israel further at odds with countries it considers its allies, its partners, its backers, and it raises questions as to how countries such as Australia deal with Israel into the future. For all of the rhetoric that's coming from Washington and Canberra insisting Israel guarantee the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, this decision by the Israeli parliament shows that Israel is prepared to ignore those demands and act as it pleases.
Matthew Doran reporting there. Democrats have stepped up their attacks on Donald Trump after a comedian opening a rally for the former president called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. In a rare move, the Trump campaign has distanced itself from the remarks. With just over a week before Election Day, the fallout underscores the importance of the Latino vote in the crucial swing state of Pennsylvania. North America correspondent Jade McMillan is there and reports from Erie.
Just a few months ago, Joe Biden was a candidate in this election. Instead, the president lined up in his home state of Delaware to cast an early ballot for his deputy.
And this is your ballot. You can step right on the floor.
Joe Biden also using the opportunity to weigh in on a scandal on the other side of politics.
It's simply embarrassing. It's beneath any president.
Donald Trump's campaign has tried to distance itself from a comedian's remarks at the former president's recent Madison Square Garden rally.
There's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah, I think it's called Puerto Rico.
A spokeswoman for Mr. Trump said the comment didn't reflect his views about the US territory, while his running mate tried to play the whole thing down.
I'm not going to comment on the specifics of the joke, but I think that we have to stop getting so offended at every little thing in the United States of America.
People living in Puerto Rico aren't allowed to vote in presidential elections. But in the critical state of Pennsylvania, more than 50% of eligible Latino residents are of Puerto Rican descent.
He said a lot of things about Latinos coming from South America through the border. So, you know, it's just, you know, it's people, I guess, are used to, you know, his behaviour.
Kamala Harris's campaign has seized on the opening.
They want a president of the United States who's about uplifting the people and not berating, not calling America a garbage can.
With just over a week until Election Day, both candidates are spending most of their time and money in the 7 states where the race is considered to be competitive. Today it was Georgia and Michigan, but they'll be in Pennsylvania later this week, and it could be the biggest prize.
Erie County in the state's northwest has picked the winner at every presidential election since 2008.
And he did nothing for us, so we have to give her the opportunity to show us.
I just don't like his delivery system sometimes. He's very brash, and that's fine. That is who Donald Trump is.
A battleground within a battleground that could prove decisive. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Erie, Pennsylvania.
Thousands of protesters have gathered in the Georgian capital Tbilisi to demand the annulment of the weekend parliamentary election. They claim the vote was stolen, with the country's pro-Western president accusing Russia of interference. The governing Georgian Dream Party, which has become increasingly authoritarian and tilted toward Moscow, won an outright majority. It says the result was free and fair, but election observers documented violations like ballot stuffing, bribery and voter intimidation. The US and the European Union have called for an independent investigation. The catastrophic impacts of the war in the Middle East are reaching families around the world. In Sydney, one family is grieving the loss of 19 relatives killed in an Israeli airstrike in a village in Lebanon's north. The Hijazi family victims range from a 4-month-old baby to a 95-year-old great-grandmother.
4 generations of the same family wiped out in one strike.
I don't think I'm in the stage of anger yet. I think I'm still in the stage of grief and sadness.
On October 14th, an Israeli airstrike flattened the home where the Hijazi family was taking refuge in the village of Aitu in northern Lebanon, some 200 kilometers away from the fighting in the south.
From all the messages we got from them, the phone calls, they were actually safe and comfortable.
The Hijazis had been displaced since the beginning of the fighting in October last year, first to nearby Srifa, then to Aitu shortly after the Israeli ground invasion of southern Lebanon.
We actually thought there's no way someone would target that, the north of Lebanon. It's never happened before.
In total, 19 family members were killed, including 95-year-old matriarch and great-grandmother Haji Sirriye, her daughter Emel, and her son Hussein and his wife Sana, 7 of her grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren, including 11-month-old baby Ruqayya and 4-month-old baby Eileen, who died with both her parents, Jenna and Ali.
It took them 3 years to have her. They struggled a lot. And according to Jinan, my cousin, she died in his arms. So he was holding her. All the young, we call them Akmar, which is like the moons of the family. It's not something you plan to deal with. It's just, I guess you have to deal with it. You've got no other choice.
The Israeli military said it struck a Hezbollah target and has launched a review into reports of civilian casualties.
There's nothing to substantiate that claim. I know them and I know who they are. All I can say, it's not true. It's definitely not true.
It's very, very frustrating to see them use that excuse, and it makes us feel like we're not going to get any justice for our family.
A devastated family who say they will never be the same again. Nabil Al-Nashar, ABC News, Sydney.
Myer is set for a merger in a deal worth almost $1 billion. The department store wants to join forces with the company that owns chain stores Just Jeans, Portman's and JJ's.
Many people know Myer for its perfume counters and its long history in Australia.
Familiar landmark, Myers of Melbourne is one of the big 6 in world retailing.
However, these days, the retailer has been struggling with its profit margins, and younger Australians like Shay and Delora are shopping online instead.
Not a lot of range. I don't think that I'm their target market.
Now Myer is betting its future on a merger.
This is about ensuring that Myer, which is 125 years old, can continue to be a sustainable business.
The deal would see Myer buy up 5 retail chains, including Just Jeans, Dotti and Portman's. All of these are brands that are currently owned by Solomon Lew's Premier Investments.
I'm personally very excited by this transaction and will be joining the board of Myer, as well as remaining its chairman of Premier Investments.
The deal is worth almost $1 billion. It still needs sign-off from the consumer watchdog and shareholders.
We're going to vote for the merger. We believe that the merger is transformational.
This retail analyst says the deal is a dud.
Trying to bridge the gap from 13 or 12 up to 80 is problematic. What I would do is I'd rebrand Myer.
Myer's pushing ahead with this merger at the same time that another Australian legacy retailer has collapsed. The owner of Rivers, Noni B and Katie's just entered voluntary administration, which is putting 3,000 jobs at risk.
I think it's dead and buried. I'd be surprised if someone tried to resurrect it.
Tough times for retail prompting major mergers. Amelia Terzon, ABC News.
The Australian dollar has continued to fall, but the local share market managed its 3rd straight rise. Here's Alan Kohler.
Financial markets are betting that next week's election will see the return of inflation and a limit on further US rate cuts because both candidates plan to lift the budget deficit with spending and/or tax cuts. So the US dollar is rising and the Aussie dollar has dropped 5% in a month to 65.6 US cents today. Here's a chart of US government debt as a percentage of GDP since the War of Independence. Apart from World War II, it's the highest it's ever been. And here's what the Congressional Budget Office is predicting will happen based on existing policies before the election promises increase it some more. The share market rose 1/3% today, led by banks and miners and Premier Investments, which is selling 3 of its retail businesses to Myer. Guess which company investors think is doing better out of the deal? Premier is up 10%, Myer down 1.6%. And here's a chart comparing the share prices of Myer and Premier over the past 10 years. Myer has halved, Premier has tripled. Its market value is now more than 6 times that of Myer. And that's because Premier's profit margin is close to 10%, while Myer's is 2.3%. Now, today's deal is complicated, but basically Myer is issuing shares to Premier in return for Just Jeans, Dotti, JJ's and some cash. And Premier Solomon Lew ends up with 26% of Myer and goes on the board to teach them how to make a margin of 10%. They hope. Most global markets went up today, apart from China's. Oil fell a bit more and the iron ore price jumped 2.5%. Oh, and tomorrow is quarterly CPI day, which will decide if and when we get a rate cut. The RBA is looking for 3% headline, 3.5% core. If it's less, happy days. And that's finance.
T20 World Cup winning wicketkeeper Matthew Wade has announced his retirement from international cricket, effective immediately. The 36-year-old Tasmanian played 97 one-day internationals and 92 T20 matches for Australia, his last at this year's T20 World Cup in the West Indies. He announced his retirement from long-form cricket last year after playing 36 tests. Wade will immediately transition to coaching, announced as Australia's wicket-keeping and fielding coach for next month's T20 series against Pakistan. He'll continue to play domestic one-day cricket for Tasmania and in the Big Bash for the Hobart Hurricanes. A spectacular goal from Kyra Cooney-Cross has helped the Matildas upset Germany 2-1 in Duisburg. The world number 4 Germany took an early lead in the friendly. Australia answered with a long-range strike from Cooney-Cross in the 39th minute. It was her first goal for the Matildas. Claire Hunt also scored her maiden international goal as the Matildas beat Germany for the first time in 19 years.
I couldn't stop thinking about it after I scored. It just feels a big relief. I think we've all been waiting for this moment for a long time and it's finally happened, and especially on my 50th game, so it's even more special.
And there's been a Spanish double at the Ballon d'Or Awards in Paris. Manchester City midfielder Rodri took out the male footballer of the year ahead of Brazilian Vinicius Junior. Barcelona's Aitana Bonmati won the women's Ballon d'Or for the 2nd year in a row. To the weather, and we haven't had any lenticular clouds for a while, and tonight's version, snapped from the Lenna Valley, is from Hamley Perry. It was a gorgeous day, much like that for much of the state. Only the West and the Bass Strait Islands didn't crack 20 degrees. St Helens topped the state with 24, Hobart reached 23, Devonport 21, 20 degrees in Launceston and Burnie. Again, just some light rain about the west yesterday. Mount Reid had 6 millimetres, Strawn 2. The satellite image shows mostly clear skies over Tasmania and a westerly airstream. There is a large front that's slowly approaching from the southwest. It's expected to reach us late Wednesday into Thursday morning, bringing showers. Across the country tomorrow, a possible shower in Brisbane, storms in Darwin, fine in the other capitals, up to 31 in Perth, Adelaide 27, Sydney 25, Melbourne 21. Back home, it will be fine, apart from isolated showers about the west and far south. Much of the day will remain fine out west, but there's a very high chance of showers late in the day. Just a medium chance of a shower in Smithton and King Island. Burnie fine at 18, Devonport 19, up to 22 degrees in Launceston. There's a medium chance of a shower in Ouse, fine and 20 in St Helens, 22 for Swansea. There's a high chance of showers about the far south, staying dry in Hobart, a top of 18 after a low of 8. Sunrise tomorrow will be at 5 minutes to 6. On coastal waters, We're expecting westerly winds that are strong from Stanley to St Helens Point, where there are strong wind warnings, and also from Wineglass Bay to Low Rocky Point. Thursday, there'll be showers extending statewide during the morning, then easing and contracting to the west, far south and northeast by the evening. Friday, fine about the central north and showers elsewhere. And Saturday looks being fine and warm, and Sunday, very warm. And that's it. Good night.